Hello and welcome to Bristol Health Cares. I'm your host, Kurt Barwis. I am the president and CEO of Bristol Health. This program is for you. It's really about how you navigate the system of care, how you access care, and it's really about trying to answer questions you may have and really didn't know who to ask. We are going to bring to you professionals, doctors, surgeons, other healthcare professionals throughout our system of care, maybe people that you've never talked to before or met before, but the goal is to really help you understand how to access care when you need it. You're going to enjoy this program. This program is really for you. So what's important is if there is something that you want to learn about or know about or a guest that you'd like me to host on this show, write us and we'll try to make that happen for you. So enjoy the program, Bristol Health Cares. Hello and welcome to this episode of Bristol Health Cares. I am Kurt Barwis, your host. Today we have a very special guest, Dr. Manon Cox. Dr. Manon Cox has a doctorate in virology. She's a very, very successful virologist. I hope I said that right. And so, Manon, tell us about yourself.
Wow, that's a very broad, open question. I actually, maybe I'll just start at the beginning, right?
Yeah, where are you from?
I am from the Netherlands. I came to the United States probably a little over 25 years ago right now, and I'll tell you a bit about my journey because I was always very curious and interested in science, and I studied biology, molecular biology, which was really at the beginning in the days that I was studying, and I was also studying at a time that HIV was killing a lot of people of my age around me in the Netherlands. So it was a bit of a scary time. And as a scientist, you read the literature, and there was this company in Connecticut called Microgenesis, and they were trying to develop an HIV vaccine. And also in those years, I went on vacation to Africa, where you could see that entire villages did not have people in the age range of 15 to 40 years of age, because they had all succumbed from AIDS. They all died from HIV. So I really got interested in that, but then obviously as you study and graduate, you go look for your first job. So I ended up working in a company called Gist Brocades, and I really learned how to develop products. I was working on an industrial enzyme. I forgot a little bit about medicines and etc. I just had a job as a molecular biologist, and after about 6 years in working in the lab, I realized that I was not as excited anymore when I was doing my experiments, and I thought I need to do something else. So I ended up in a management development program, and that management development program came with a prize. And the prize was that you could do an MBA, and my MBA was half in the United States at the University of Rochester, the Simon School, and half in the Netherlands, where I was living, obviously, in the University of Nijrode. So I spent quite a bit of time in Rochester, New York, and I really enjoyed the way the Americans looked at life, because in the Netherlands we are very grounded, and in America it was a little bit like fake it until you make it. Also, you could graduate cum laude even though you didn't have like perfect scores. As long as you were better than other people, you would get A's, or today it's even A pluses. So I thought, these people have a really interesting way of looking at things. And I, at that time, started realizing that I really wanted to go back into pharma and biopharmaceuticals. So I thought, what is better than trying to, work for a couple of years in the United States in a biotech company and then bring that knowledge back to the Netherlands and start my own company there. So I worked about 10, 12 years in this big company. 7,000 people. They sponsored my MBA, which was great. And with that MBA, I was actually able to get a job at the company that used to be Microgenesis. So it was basically full circle around.
Wow.
And that job that I got was interestingly director of business development, but very quickly it became clear in this company where there were about 40 scientists. They were at that time no longer called Microgenesis because they had realized that the development of an HIV vaccine was so complicated that it was better to leave that behind and what have you. So I was director of business development, charged with bringing in business to the company and helping shape the science in the organization. So I joined them. Very quickly it became clear that I knew how to develop products, whereas in this company these scientists were working on 10 different vaccines. But if you try to do that, you won't get anywhere, right? Because I didn't finish my entire story about Gis Burkades. We worked with 40 people on a product to bring that product to market. 40 people, same product, and that ultimately led to an enzyme, an industrial enzyme that is today still being used by Unilever and Procter & Gamble and being described as one of the best enzymes to dissolve greasy stains from your clothes. So I knew how to do that, right? Because I had been working with 40 people trying to make that happen. And I realized that at Protein Sciences, if we didn't focus, we would never get across the finish line. So we had one product which had promise, because I joined the company in 1998, and that was the time that there was a first outbreak of avian bird flu in Hong Kong. And the avian bird flu was something really curious, because there were 18 people that they identified that were infected with this virus, but 6 of them died, even though they got all hospital care that was possible. So everybody panicked around the world because people were thinking, well, what if this bird flu starts spreading around the world? And Protein Sciences had a technology, and we'll come back to that later, the baculovirus technology, that allowed you to make an influenza vaccine without the use of chicken eggs. Because today, maybe not everybody realizes this, 90% of the world's supply of influenza vaccines is all made in chicken embryos. So you need chickens and you need eggs. Yeah. And this bird flu was killing birds like crazy. So people started worrying about, is there, what is going to happen if this bird flu goes around? Can we still make influenza vaccines? And Protein Sciences had this technology that they used to try to make an HIV vaccine that you could also use to make an influenza vaccine that did not depend on those chicken eggs. So we did a clinical study. We received funding from NIH. We did a clinical study where we showed that if you would that we could make a vaccine, an H5 vaccine it was called, that could protect you against this bird flu, and but except you needed 2 doses and you needed a very high quantity of protein in comparison to traditional vaccines. So that basically put the company a little bit of a step backwards, but we created sufficient excitement in the scientific world that we continued to get grants from NIH that allowed us to, to further the development of an influenza vaccine. So, as I said, I started as business development. It very quickly became clear that I really had a lot of product development experience, so I was named Chief Operating Officer. I helped direct the company into, really focusing on this influenza vaccine, while at the same time we collaborated with a lot of other companies, pharmaceutical companies, and we learned from them, right? Because I always realized, you're only as smart as all the people that you work with, because one person cannot do it alone. So over the years, it took a long time, 15 years of development of the influenza vaccine until we received FDA approval. So FDA approval for a product that was not produced in eggs. We switched, we used that knowledge that we generated around avian influenza. We used that, we translated that into the influenza strains that normally cause disease in humans. And we were able to just develop this product called Flublok, which got licensed by the FDA in 2000, I think it was 2013. And then the company really ended up, by that time I was already CEO, and we had been able to get lots of money, $150 million from the US government to actually fund that program, because they realized how important it was going to be for pandemic preparedness. Because not only did we have that wave of avian influenza in 1998, over the years we saw more and more chicken flocks all over the world developing this avian influenza. And even today, even after we had a pandemic called COVID, we realized that if you would ever have an avian influenza pandemic, the situation would be very different, because then the mortality rate wouldn't be less than 1%. It would be really, 30%, 20, wow. 30%, right? And in a situation like that, I think everybody would want to take a vaccine.
Yeah.
If you would see that healthy people around you would die. So long story short, 15 years of development, product got approved. It was not easy to sell the product because it was a pure protein vaccine. It had all the things that you would want. No egg protein in there, no preservatives, no antibiotics. It was really like a pure, nice vaccine that also had an enormous benefit. It took actually 10 years of being in the market and a large pharmaceutical company starting to sell the product for protein sciences. To get CDC to recognize that it is a vaccine that has preferred recommendation now for the prevention of influenza. So that was Flublok. Company got acquired by a large pharmaceutical company about 5 years ago. They thought they didn't need me, so they basically asked me to leave the company, and after that I started doing other things. So
wow.
Yeah, so, wow.
Manon, I've known you for a while, and I didn't really understand the full journey, and probably still don't understand it. But what I feel from you is this incredible passion, whether it's leadership, whether it's in the lab, whether it's, you have like encapsulated, and you could see it in your face. You glow when you talk about it. It's like, wow, where does that come from?
Well, I think if you don't have passion, you shouldn't become a scientist, because a lot of things can be frustrating. It takes a long time. I'm telling you, it took like 15 years to get FDA approval for this vaccine. So you need to believe in something. And I really, I want to do things that can make people's life better. And my dream was always to develop an HIV vaccine. We talked about that a little earlier. I think it's a shame that when COVID hit, wealthy countries, all of a sudden all the money was made available to develop rapidly a vaccine that in the end maybe wasn't even that good. But for HIV, we are now 40 years later. It's still a very important problem, but it's a problem of, the developing world. About 15 years ago, I attended a talk by the chief scientist of Bristol Script. They developed a drug, right, that people that live with HIV can take, and it will basically, it allows them to live with HIV. But in poor countries, not everyone can afford that. And even today, right, we have in the United States, we have basically every day still getting new people infected with HIV. So I would really want it to move us forward so that we can do something like that. I believe in prevention, and that is what makes me passionate about this. And what is better than doing something that in the end results in, a better life for people.
It's as I'm sitting here listening to you, I'm thinking about the people that are going to be watching this program. And I personally think it's exciting because to hear you talk, because I don't think the general public understands what goes into and how much work the whole life cycle product. You said 40 years and we still don't have a vaccine for AIDS.
Yeah.
But there are people passionately working towards that goal all across this world, right? I mean, and I did what I said earlier was I read somewhere that is a dream, and I can't remember which company it was that was working on it, but they were talking about, the possibility of having that vaccine. But it sounds like it never occurred to me that thought process happened so long ago, but the reality of it is so real. I mean, for countries where, because they described in the poor countries where this is really in Africa and some other places where people are dying every day from it, how effective it would be if we could come up with that.
Yeah, I mean, vaccines are basically a very cost-effective way, right, to prevent diseases from happening.
Yeah.
And I guess the difficulty in developing vaccines, and the difficulty also why there is still today no HIV vaccine, is it's extraordinarily expensive, because what you need to do is you need to show that you can prevent a disease, but not everybody will get that disease. So in other words, if you develop a treatment for a disease, you take a population, a group of people that is suffering from that disease, you treat them with your drug, and you see, like, does it cure them?
Yeah.
If you try to develop a vaccine, what you need to do, I'll give you the influenza example again. In a given season, of 100 people, maybe 5 people will develop influenza. So if you want to test whether a vaccine actually works, you need to not look at those 5 people, because you can only catch those 5 people if you have 100 people. So if you want to develop a product and demonstrate efficacy, you need to look in 10,000 people. You need to enroll 10,000 people in your clinical study, and you need to hope that there's enough influenza in the season that you can demonstrate that somebody who receives your product versus a placebo is actually protected.
Yeah.
And I guess that is really the challenge with HIV as well, because in the United States, at some point in time, there were not enough cases anymore, new cases, to actually demonstrate that you could prevent with a vaccine the development of that disease. You could prevent it in Africa, but who in Africa has enough money to actually afford to do these very large studies? So the companies that are still very actively working on this are struggling with, where do we get the money? Who is willing to fund this?
Yeah.
Right?
And you mentioned that so much money poured into the epidemic, the pandemic that we had with the coronavirus. And you're right. I mean, it was literally overnight. I mean, working in healthcare, so much money was pushed out, to take care of people. It was extraordinary. So
yeah, and a lot of money was spent on vaccine development, and the vaccine development was extraordinarily rapidly, but we never did the real long-term placebo-controlled studies that were required. We didn't have time for that, right? Because there was a pandemic going on, and people were in lockdown, etc. So we needed a solution. And actually we ended up with a vaccine which was great for its purpose, but it has a very short duration. And that is why some doctors are now giving their patients every 3 months a new COVID vaccine. And that's, of course, not a sustainable solution.
I remember going into the clinical trials after I had COVID very early on, and it was a big deal to be able to go in. But I remember going in to give my blood for the antibodies and all, and it was like everybody was suited up, and I was in this room, and it was like all by myself. And anyway, so I'm curious, because there's a lot of young people that watch this show. I hope there's a lot of young people that watch this show, but you kind of put a different face on science. It's passion, it's excitement. It's, when I remember being a transport in the Fox Chase Cancer Center and going into the lab, when I wanted to get lost and just kind of like not do anything. Yeah. And it was quiet, and there was all these, people working in research, and, and it was kind of like, wow, this is kind of interesting. And they all had their bulletin boards outside their labs. And if I ever stopped and looked at it, they would run out and talk to me about it, even though I was just a patient transport. But what you just described in this incredible journey that you took isn't like that at all. I mean...
No, and I think a lot of people maybe kind of cool down and get disinterested in science because they do work in a lab on one, you know, series of specific experiments and they never get to do anything else. But it's up to you, right?
Yeah.
It's up to you to also create that excitement and to do, you know. So I think it's important that everybody finds something that they are passionate about, and then you can do whatever you want in that field.
And you certainly did. It's like you saw this kind of nice, perfect segue into product development. Yeah. And at the same time, you went back and got your MBA, and you immediately utilized that to kind of get to the next step and the next step. And it's just an incredible journey. Now, so what are you doing now? I'm curious.
What am I doing now? So after I, you know, let's say got fired from Sanofi. Actually, I do want to say this. Sanofi received, thanks to Protein Sciences, $1.6 billion from the United States to develop a COVID vaccine. But what they had done is they had so basically, in my opinion, destroyed the Protein Sciences organization that had been successful in developing this influenza vaccine, that they were unable to develop a COVID vaccine in the record time that was needed. So it was really, it was sad. It was basically a destruction of government funding, because the government had put $150 million in Protein Sciences to do pandemic preparedness. Sanofi then received, because they had acquired Protein Sciences, $1.6 billion to develop a COVID vaccine, and they were not successful. They finally had a COVID vaccine after the pandemic was over. So that is a side note. What I started doing, 2 years later, I ran into scientists from Sanofi who said, they shouldn't have fired you. because I knew who could do what, right? Whereas in a big company, people are often in boxes.
Yeah.
So they can only do that. But what I'm doing right now is I'm really working with a lot of small companies and helping them with product development in board positions. I'm the incoming president of the International Society of Vaccines, where we really focus on coaching young people, young scientists, you know, developing the next generation of vaccinologists, which I'm very excited about. And, you know, I help young entrepreneurs in this field, by the way. And then the last thing I did last year, and I will not do that again, but I felt I was obligated, because the baculovirus system is a production technology that we use to make Flublok. And a lot of people ask me questions about how do you do this, etc. So this book is a book for scientists who are interested in all kind of methods to work with this production system. Took me a year to get it together with a lot of very brilliant authors, but it's done.
No, Dr. Cox, this has been absolutely amazing, and we are going to do another segment, and for the viewing audience, and hopefully this passion that you're feeling is something that ignites you, as it has me. She's not just a scientist, but an entrepreneur for sure, in every respect, a very successful one. So this is Kurt Barwis. It's Bristol Health Cares. You could write us at cares@bristolhospital.org. Always welcome your suggestions and ideas. And a special thanks to Nutmeg TV. It is a nonprofit organization, and it looks for community support. And as you well know, their programming is incredible. The shows that they bring you, the shows that bring the community to you in your own house are only made possible through support from organizations and from the general public. So until the next time, this is Kurt Barwis, President and CEO of Bristol Health. Have a wonderful day.